Welcome to our first UX Roundtable discussion. Today, we hope to bring our viewers insight into the UX world, perspectives on creating useful, usable, and engaging products, and offer advice around how to turn a UX calling into a thriving career. For today's topic, we'll be discussing basic elements of the UX craft. We have a great lineup of panelists today, and we'll start off with a round of introductions. If you could each introduce yourself, share your current role, and how you got into UX. I'll start. My name's Joyita Banerjee. I'm a senior user experience researcher at Google. And Racine, please kick us off.
I'm Racine Davis, and I'm also an interaction designer at Google.
Great. And could you share a little bit more about how you got into UX?
I got a degree in digital media from the University of Central Florida with the focus of interactive systems. And so a lot of our coursework was centered around UX experiences. And so post-college, I decided to freelance and kind of work with a series of engineers where I got to kind of be the designer on those projects and kind of lend some UX support.
Thanks for sharing. Kai.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Kai Conragan. I'm a UX director at Search, at Google. I've been working in the search product space for about the last 8 years. I got into user experience design, funnily enough, through surfing. When I grew up, I didn't really know that user experience design was a profession. I don't know that it was officially taught in programs at the time. But I grew up surfing, and at the time, the way that I got my information was actually through magazines. We didn't really have the internet and cell phones and things like that. And so each month I would look forward to the magazines that came to give me new pictures and updates about my favorite surfers. And it was much later that I realized that the designer of one of my favorite magazines, Surfer Magazine, was a guy named David Carson, who was a pretty famous designer back in the 1990s. And that kind of launched me into kind of a curiosity around, can you really do something like lay out pictures and images and typography as a profession? And long story short is that propelled me into studying industrial design in college with a focus on visual communication. At the same time, I got really interested in some of the technical, things that were emerging at the time with the web. And I was fortunate to be able to build a program in college that allowed me to blend design and technology. And from there, I started working with some different companies like Oracle and McAfee. Also started my own design firm where we did a lot of creative work with outdoor sports companies. And eventually landed here at Google, where I've been for the past 10 years.
Thanks for sharing. Bobby, please share with us your story.
Yeah, hi, my name's Bobby. I'm a VP of UX at Google, and I've had something of a circuitous path to UX that actually began when I was in elementary school, and my parents had purchased an Apple IIc computer for the home way back in the kind of prehistoric ages. And I think, I stayed glued to that thing morning, evening, night, every hour of the day that I could. I ate dinner at the machine. I learned to program in BASIC at that point. And I think one of the big things was I was entered in a local contest in basic programming, and I created this program called Space Math, I think, and it was all about kind of a series of kind of math equations that you would solve, and that would kind of progress your journey through space, in this UFO type spaceship, and I think that was probably like the first time in my life when I really remember having like kind of a conscientiousness of user experience and like the design of that experience, and really just kind of working with the code to like refine the nuances of like latency and like how long like the transitions were between screens and what the overall storyline was, and that attention to detail that I think later in life in college, I was a math major and a film minor. But I spent all of my free time recording and playing in bands. And as part of my math major, I had a significant computer science component within which, I became the kind of resident markup and scripting expert across my friends. So I ended up then doing a lot of websites for friends and friends bands and friends labels, and one thing led to the next, and I ended up getting brought on by a local agency, and 6 months out of college, got a contract at Amazon at the time. That was like 1998, 1999. And yeah, and that kind of began my career officially in UX. And until then, I had no idea that you could actually get paid for doing this type of work. So.
Great. Thank you for sharing, and appreciate hearing about all of the different ways the three of you found your way into this field. So my next question is pretty broad, but would love to hear from all three of you. What is UX to you? And we'll start with Racine.
That's a great question. UX, user experience, to me is the process of creating good and honest experiences for people. To me, it's highlighted in computers. They make computers in the past have been really complex things, and I think with UX, it makes complex and challenging things really accessible to people. That's UX to me. How about you, Kai?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's so simple on the surface, but there's so many nuances to how to best answer it. I guess at a basic level, user experience is about taking some capability that exists in the world and making it, accessible and easy and delightful to use for people. How we do that, though, I think there's a lot of nuance too. A lot of it comes down to, really understanding user needs and insights and developing empathy for the people that we're trying to build products for. And then using very intentional design, technical capabilities, with the devices and the sort of interfaces that we use, to make them feel that kind of ease and delight and things like that. It's a very complex, sort of space underneath it all. Again, it's a very simple question. What is UX? But I think that one of the really fascinating things is that it can be so many different things to so many different practitioners, right? From researchers to designers, et cetera.
Thank you. What are your thoughts, Bobby?
Yeah, I echo like all of that. And, I would just add that it is like the UX is ultimately the gestalt of so many different components that come together, across design and research, but even engineering and product management. And there are a lot of functions and disciplines that kind of contribute to the overall gestalt UX. But, when we think about the UX team at Google, for example, and what our role is, a lot of it is about yes, literally, it is about crafting and designing the user experience and people's interface to technology. But a huge part of that is understanding that each user's experience is actually is different, and we all come from different experiences and backgrounds, and so especially in today's era of technology, we have the opportunity to go beyond creating singular experiences that have to apply universally to everyone. And we have this opportunity to really better define how these experiences can permutate to an individual's needs, experiences, preferences, context, location, device. There's so many different facets. And that, in a lot of ways, we are kind of responsible for managing the gestalt of that, in a way that, I guess the ambition is to provide beyond bespoke experiences for just a diversity of end users. So yeah, super important as the user base continues to grow, and that technology is increasingly relevant to everyone.
Yeah, thank you for laying that helpful foundational understanding of what UX is. Bobby, again, if you could share a little bit more detail on why is it that you think UX is important?
So user experience as it applies to our roles and what we're vanguards of is important in that we effectively have to kind of define experiences that are mainstream and universally accessible to people, but are ideally not necessarily lowest common denominator. And so our roles kind of play an important part in really being vanguards of things like empathy, like expression, end-to-end experiences, and thinking about mindfulness of the seams as a user traverses multiple products or features or services. we're often the ones that, have ultimate accountability to the user at the end of the day. And so being almost like unique vanguards in the product development equation for those things is really necessary to create global experiences that are not locally optimized to like a single context or product, or feature, but that actually traverse like multiple features, multiple organizations, multiple companies, and create a gestalt that feels fluid and cohesive and easy to use and easy to grok, despite the kind of multifaceted nature of the engines behind it. So
next, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper on the field itself, and would like to hear from you to hear what are the different design disciplines that make up UX?
Yeah, there's quite a bit actually. If you love writing, you can be a UX writer. You can help shape the voice and tone of a product experience with words. You can be a UX researcher like Jolanta, who talks to users to better understand their problems or desires, and really rely on and relays that information back to the team for us to design solutions and that echoes those needs. You can be an interaction designer, someone who really guides the product direction with wireframing and prototyping, really test out our hypothesis, bring to life some of those experiences with the help of other disciplines like researchers and motion designers and visual designers, and kind of like work collaboratively as a team. These are like some of my favorite ones, but there are a number of other disciplines within UX, but these are just some of the ones I'm highlighting.
Thanks for highlighting those. Kai or Bobby, any additional ones to highlight?
I mean, I think that Racine covered a good majority of them, right? I mean, we have interaction design, emotion design, and UX engineering, and content strategy, research, et cetera. So maybe just the point I would make on top of that, right, is that I think that that's also reflective of the notion that UX is becoming more and more specialized over time. And some of the advice that I give to folks a lot of times is to be very intentional about what role you want to have there. Myself personally, like I actually in many ways still identify as a generalist, where I've actually kind of flexed across a number of those different disciplines. Although at this point in time, I'm sure my team would tell you I'm probably the worst designer of any of them, which is definitely true, right? But I've realized that the strength that I bring is the awareness and understanding of how all of those disciplines work together. And that in and of itself is a skill set, right? And in contrast, you have some of the best in-class people in the world in terms of research and motion design and visual design who have really gone deep in their craft. And I think the point I would make is that both of those are very valid, right? As we have more specialization in our field, there's going to be a different requirement on people who can effectively coordinate and choreograph those specializations. But we're going to need those specializations to really create the craft and level of quality of experience that we aim for, as sort of user expectations and our technical capabilities continue to expand.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have at Google 8 different variations of user experience folk, and I think in some ways it's almost become like the new kind of like the parallel to medicine, and the degrees of specialization in medicine in some ways are in a lot of ways reflected in like the various sort of multifarious aspects of contributions towards user experience. And similarly, I think that to Kai's point, I think there's a necessity to, despite whatever area of specialization you're in, to have some sort of mindfulness of the holistic concern, and like how the confluence of these things come together. In that it will enable you to kind of be more successful at your craft and your contribution within that equation. And that's true of UX, and that's true of broader product development altogether. Meaning understanding what some of the business constraints are and the technical constraints are allow you to design more effective experiences that, like, again, where like ultimately you want those cards to fall in favor of the end user. Now, as it applies to kind of considering a career in UX, this is just where there's so much like greenfield open space to really be able to shape or define roles that are really like just copacetic for your particular interests and talents. And so across those like multiple lines of user experience, whether it be research or interaction design or visual design or motion design or UX engineering or UX writing or UX program management and so on. Like, I think that there are ways to be involved that go very deep in a singular craft, you know, or play orchestrative roles across multiple. And so really just like, I think it's one of the things that excites me about it so much is that there's really so much opportunity to bring a diversity of intelligences to the table, like in a way that, you know, where each of those intelligences play a very discrete and unique role and fundamental role often in the development or design of something. But like, ultimately the experience will fall apart if there is not enough connective tissue across all of these things. And so, you know, for myself, I think I've been in different roles at different, you know, points of my career. And what I've ultimately kind of landed on is that I'm a product developer first and foremost, and I use kind of my various skills like within UX to inform like the development of those product experiences for users. And for me personally, I think being able to kind of leverage, you know, I don't know, maybe it's a jack of all trades kind of thing, you know, but in some ways that helps just kind of retain a mindfulness for the holistic concern and really ensuring that experiences like are orchestrated in a way where all of the goodness kind of comes together like meaningfully and coherently.
Thank you for sharing. Kai, I wanted to ask you specifically, what would you say UX's unique contribution to the product development process is, and how might that differ or be distinct from other partners in this process?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think in the simplest sense, you know, that maybe starts with the name itself, but user experience, right? And I think that user experience professionals really have a higher order sort of commitment to really maximizing like the value for users with whatever we're building. You know, just because we can build something doesn't mean that it's necessarily the right thing to build. And user experience, you know, practitioners are really that kind of vanguard for, is this the right thing for the users, right? You know, I think a second part of this is that, you know, technology is moving at such a fast rate. You know, I mean, there are new breakthroughs, I mean, quite literally, you know, every year, if not more often. And I think it's really in our charter to make sure that those technological innovations remain as accessible and useful to people as possible. You know, so we spend a lot of our time thinking again about how do we kind of marry these new technical capabilities to maximal effect in terms of the number of people that can use them. You know, but do so in a way that feels innovative and progressive while still being inclusive to so many different people and experiences. You know, and I think the last part of it is that, you know, technology can tend to be, you know, utilitarian at times, right? In many ways, it is just, you know, databases and this and that, right? And it's our job to make these experiences delightful to use, meaningful, emotionally resonant, and things like that. And I think that that's another big part of the role that UX plays that is unique maybe to some of the other functions.
Yeah, appreciate you sharing that. And given that all three of you have a lot of experience within UX, I'd love to learn a little bit more about what are some of the struggles or challenges that you faced within this field? And Racine, we can start with you.
Some of the challenges that I face within UX have been ones that have deal with the intersection of like online and offline experiences. For instance, experiences that, you know, requesting a ride on an app and then meeting a stranger that's going to take you to your destination. That sounds simple in concept. However, there's a lot of nuances and possibilities for that experience to go awry. And so in ensuring a pleasant and safe experience is quite challenging. And because of that complexity and how people experience that product, for instance, in part because people are complex, right? There's a lot of cultural expectations, unconscious biases that we bring with us with every interaction. And so it makes the job of the designer quite complex in that we still have to fulfill that promise, even with these complexities that we have to deal with.
And are there any particular meaty challenges that you've personally tried to solve while being a UXer that you'd like to share?
Yeah, it stems from that same example that I gave. in having to deal specifically in the realm of like keeping people safe with this online and offline sort of dichotomy. And it's quite challenging, again, because people are challenging. And I think, safety is an interesting concept in that, like, safety for whom? What might be considered safe for one person could be a detriment to another community. And so you're not only solving like technology problems, you're also solving people problems and dealing with people and how we sort of like deal with each other. And so yeah, I think that's been an experience I've had in the past that was very immediate and very challenging, but also very, very rewarding when you get it right and you keep people safe.
Definitely. And how about you, Bobby? Please share with us some challenges you faced.
In some ways, like, UX and design altogether is all about the challenges. I think it was Charles Eames who said that, design is about constraints. And that's what kind of ultimately differentiates it from, art, or expression otherwise, is that, like, we are kind of continually having to evaluate how to operate within constraints, but also how to manage the multiple factors in the equation such that, like whether that is like business or technical, but, managing these various factors in a way that the cards ultimately fall in favor of the user. I think that's, that itself is a challenge. And I think that thinking about then doing mainstream design for 2 billion users a day in the case of search here, it's a key challenge there is like making those experiences universally accessible and useful, in accord with our mission statement, in ways that, like I was saying earlier, enable like these bespoke experiences that kind of like permute to a user's intention and needs and their kind of specific individual user needs in ways that aren't kind of reductive, or kind of, generalized. And I think that's like a huge challenge we're facing today, especially in the spirit of wanting our products to be globally accessible and useful.
And how about you, Kai? What are some of the challenges that perhaps have not yet been mentioned that you feel the field of UX is experiencing?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, but both of the examples already cited really resonate. So I'll just offer it, perhaps a different one. I think one of the difficult things, and maybe this is kind of the kind of design practitioner from when I was looking at magazines as a kid, right? But is that you oftentimes don't have control over the final outcome. So when you're looking at a magazine, you can lay out the typography and the pictures and things like that, and have a real final say on what the final output is, right? But when you're doing UX, you're really in many ways designing in frameworks, right? Because the number of intersections that exist between the data, the users, the platforms, and things like that are almost infinite, right? And so it takes a real ability to think in abstraction, right? To say, okay, like, how do I design patterns that are going to be resilient to a number of different use cases, not ever knowing what the final potential outcome might be, right? And so maybe back to the point that Bobby's making, like that becomes like one of the core constraints, right? And I can't remember who said this, but this notion that you don't have a platform until somebody's used it in ways that you didn't intend. And I think that when you're designing, you're oftentimes designing for potential, but not necessarily for the final thing. So it takes a lot of practice to really think through the technical aspects of that, the design aspects, the user understanding, to design in a way that scales, but that's going to have outcomes that you could never fully anticipate.
Yeah, that all makes sense, and appreciate you all sharing the struggles and challenges faced within UX. Another follow-up question to that is what are noteworthy challenges, whether they be societal challenges or underserved user needs, could use more UX expertise?
I mean, gosh, there's so many. I think that one of the real pieces that I really wrestle with on a daily basis is that we are designing experiences that really become a major way that people spend their time and energy in their lives, right? And I think that bears a tremendous amount of responsibility on us in terms of our sort of commitment to kind of user value. I think when you think about architecture, city planners and things like that, they're designing experiences that ultimately have like huge impact on the physical landscape, our traffic patterns and things like that. And I think in a very similar way now, the experiences that we're designing are setting, the precedents for how we spend time as humans. And when you kind of really grapple with kind of that concept, it makes you realize that we need to bring a lot more to the table than necessarily just the technical aspects of the design work, right? It really does require more thinking about what role should UX play in society, what ethical obligations do we have? I don't purport to have answers, but it's definitely one of the kind of the biggest questions that I still spend a lot of time thinking about.
And how about you, Racine?
I agree with Kai. There's so many areas. I would focus on ones that are underserved communities. Really using UX as a way to like listen to those communities, understand the needs, and work to find solutions that addresses those needs, and wherever possible, find moments of delight. It's kind of a broad answer, but I think just that general landscape, I think it's meaty enough. Yeah.
I could go on for days on this subject alone, but I will narrow it down to two things that I think that I'm personally sort of driven by in terms of noteworthy challenges that I think UX can play a really big role in. The first of which is just helping people make sense in this era of overwhelming information, where information has dwarfed people's available time and resources. And like that sense making and sort of being able to parse information for what is quality information versus lesser quality information is something that like we absolutely have to solve for. And specifically Google as a company is its core to our mission. But I think in that, there's also an opportunity that as we can allow people to navigate information more confidently with a degree of assurance at the baseline of quality across all types of information, that actually provides us the opportunity to allow people to extend beyond their known filter bubbles and to kind of adjacent points of view that enable them to expand their parallax, because they can do so confidently, understanding that it's equally valid. It's simply a slightly different angle, or different point of view on the subject. And through that, you kind of get people who are able to expand their worldviews, increase their empathy for other viewpoints and perspectives. And, a whole lot of like goodness, I think, can come from that. But, at its core, I think it's just so important that we're able to that we're enabling users to be able to navigate information like confidently and really understand the kind of veracity and like the nature of the source, and like in ways that we're neutral arbiters of, but empower users basically, to navigate that information that they're seeking. Secondly, I think that there is a social responsibility bit that, like, I think to Racine's point on serving underrepresented users, I think there is a looming challenge that we are going to have as a society in terms of understanding what role machine learning plays in our experiences, especially because as it comes to or as we if we're talking about underrepresented groups, machine learning is like repeatedly shown that you have this bias in, bias out effect, and if we are not like being conscientious about our regulation of bias upstream, in our design and development, we know that can have exponential effect on society at large. And that level of accountability and responsibility is something that's very new for us. I mean, it's crazy if you think about like a low voltage electrician has to get a certification, but there really isn't a requirement today for a UXer to do so, despite the fact that the things that we're designing, can have pretty exponential, effect and output on society at large. And so that I feel is like another really big opportunity for UX to lead the way on. I think it's something that extends beyond any single team or organization or even company, honestly. And it's something we have to come together as an industry to really reconcile what is our code of ethics and our principles around this that effectively are going to support the design of the society that we want to live in. And yeah, I mean, again, this is a subject that I could go on for hours, if not days on.
It's really inspirational to hear the potential impact for UX on society. So thank you so much for sharing those challenges that UX can tackle. The next question is that given that there are likely many learners for the new UX certification class that Grow with Google has just launched, what's one piece of advice you would give to new students?
That's a great question that I get quite often. And I would say, to keep it short, be prolific in practice. Try to solve problems that, you're having personally and use design thinking to kind of help solve those problems. In addition to the fact that when I was starting out and I sort of did 100 days of UI, it's where you take, a small prompt like, design a digital airplane ticket and you design an experience around that. It helps give you a better grasp of the design tools, reinforces design thinking, and it also demonstrates your potential. And so, yeah, I would just say practice and be prolific. It's a great space to be in that you don't need a doctorate or a special lab to practice UX. You just need drive and motivation. And so I would go practice.
Great advice. And Bobby, what pieces of advice would you give to our students here?
Yeah, along the same lines of what Racine said, I think what's really most important, there's two factors. It's kind of the quality of your work and who you are as a person. And I think those two things, everything else is secondary to that. You don't need fancy degrees. You don't need there is very, very little that matters apart from those two things. And I think that, in terms of pursuing things that are true to your passions, that basically intersect the things that you're passionate about with the things that you're talented at, and hence Racine's point of practice really being an imperative to talent, and where you can have impact. You focus on those three things and really everything else comes. I can say that with confidence, and pretty much every single person I've known in my career that's either, that I'm peer of or that reported to me, or even my managers, I've seen the people that are the happiest are the folks that focus on those things. And so, yeah, as far as getting started off, definitely just, develop that love and passion for the work and the craft and the details around it. And if you've got to if you're looking for a job, it's so much better just to kind of showcase that one thing that you're really proud of, that you feel is really representative of your craft and your passion, and your own sort of idiosyncratic personality and what you bring to the equation, that may be unique or different from other people. And I think, that's what matters. So.
And Kai, what would your advice be?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this case, I do have to echo both Racine and Bobby. I mean, I agree. The number one piece of advice I usually give people that ask is, is just to make stuff. Don't get too precious and just build stuff. I think that what I've seen is that, over time, the tools and the design, languages and design systems and things that we use change quite a bit over time, but the fundamentals of the design work never really changes. And the understanding about what it takes to take something from an idea all the way to to execution is just critical, right? And so take your favorite brand and redesign their website, take your favorite app and redesign it, build your own portfolio. All those kinds of things will give you so much value, not just in terms of the output, but in terms of the process that goes into it. And then I think just to piggyback on what Bobby was saying, everything that I look for when I'm looking at a UX is ultimately with the quality of the work, and then equally the curiosity and commitment to learning. Because again, our profession in many ways is being reinvented almost annually, and so what you're looking for are ultimately people who have that curiosity and that conviction to learning. and being comfortable, being in situations where they aren't the expert and they don't have all the answers, but knowing how to get the answers and the process that they need to follow to get there.
Thank you so much, Bobby, Kai, and Racine for answering all of our questions today. That just concluded our final question. But now we'd like to open up the floor to answer any live questions from our virtual audience joining us today. Please feel free to share any questions you have, and we'll kick off our Q&A portion after a 2-minute brief break. Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for the questions that you've submitted. And feel free to keep the questions flowing. But to kick off this section of our live Q&A here, I wanted to ask the folks on the panel, what would you say are the key things to highlight in a UX interview? And Racine, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I would say highlight your design process and capabilities. So if you sketch as part of your design process, I would show your sketches. I would talk about how you arrived at your design solution. What challenges you faced during that process. And then if you had more time, what were some things that you would change about your solution? Yeah.
I'm happy to offer a few thoughts here too. I think one of the biggest things is to really make sure that you're communicating what the problem was that you're trying to solve for. There are almost an infinite number of solutions to any problem. And so when you just are looking at the design work itself, it's really good to understand what were the core problems that you were trying to solve? What was the research process that you undertook to kind of get better understanding? And then what were the factors that ultimately led you to the end solution? I think the other thing that I would say just more generally is I've seen in a lot of interviews, folks feeling a need to kind of be almost overly comprehensive about everything. And I would really just encourage people to focus on really highlighting the work that they think is really the best representative of what they can produce, and really kind of bringing the people who are interviewing along on the journey of what went into the final solution.
Great, thank you for answering that question. Our next question is that UX design has a lot of different categories. So how can I choose the suitable category for my career? Feel free to chime in. And this is open to everyone.
I'm happy to start on this one. I mean, I'd say there's a few different things to this, right? I mean, number one is I would say really try to pick what you're most passionate about. I mean, I think the real, opportunity right now is that UX is, a very in-demand, profession. And so, whether it's motion design, interaction design, or research, or program management, there are so many different opportunities. And so really trying to encourage people to focus more like what is kind of their intrinsic passion in the space, I think is a really good starting point. I think the second thing that I would say is, and I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but no matter what kind of specialization or function you pick, it's incredibly important that you're aware of and attentive to kind of the broader work in front of you. And so I think it's really beneficial to really get, enough understanding of each of the disciplines, to allow you to be a stronger contributor as you think about how you activate the other people that you're working with. And learning about those disciplines, early in your kind of career, might also give you better instinct on where do you want to go in the long term, right? Back to that idea of, do you want to kind of be more in a generalist kind of choreographer role, or is there one of the disciplines in front of you that really is standing out as something that you're a lot more interested in and going deep there?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I would add to that is like, with the diversity of opportunity, in the UX space, that really that's an opportunity to lean into kind of your own diversity and your own uniqueness and your own individuality. And so there's just a ton of space to be able to kind of define a role that is really unique to you and be successful, like leaning into being yourself in a lot of ways and the things that you're interested in. There's a Japanese concept called ikigai that is kind of basically translates to a reason for being. And it's a Venn diagram that basically says that we should be targeting the intersection between the things that we love doing, the things that we're great at, the things that give us meaning, and of course what we can be paid for. And I think and that being sort of really key to career success and fulfillment and being. So I think the spectrum of opportunity in UX is something that that should ideally be like provide you that opportunity to kind of really figure out, what's the intersectionality of those things for you and how you can make a career out of what you love doing and what you're great at.
Yeah, I think those are good answers. I would maybe just add, I would do a bit of research. LinkedIn is a great resource to talk to people in the field. More times than not, if you reach out to someone asking for a few minutes of their time to ask them some questions, like they'll more likely than not to say yes. So yeah, I would do some research. But I think I just want to echo kind of Bobby and Kai's point. I think those are great answers as well.
Thanks for that advice. And our next question is, how does the advancement in AI and natural language programming impact the needs for more specialized UX designers in the voice UX UI field, especially to better serve the next billion users? Bobby, why don't you kick us off with this one?
Yeah, thanks, Everest, for your question. Definitely a very, very exciting one. Is like we are currently in the frontier of really understanding the opportunity space here. And I think that especially as it applies to UX, I mean, I think there's been a lot of like sort of, there's been a history of this for like in a sense, but certainly not as it applies to the mainstream. And where we're seeing some of the biggest opportunities is in like being able to transcend some of the language barriers with kind of written or typed text, or queries that are facilitated by being able to use voice to invoke like either queries on search or, whatever the case may be. And that kind of has really helped with like globally with people being able to interface and engage with that value. That was just like it's really kind of inhibited and complex to do otherwise via the keyboard. It's also true just for like the new generation of like kids who are interfacing with technology. It's such a colloquial means to be able to compute basically, and we're seeing like just how kind of almost that kind of democratizes in some ways like the access to information and understanding, is like voice plays a really, really big role in that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that so that's like when you think about the next billion users, whether geographically, or even like the emergent mainstream of youth, like voice is playing like a critical role in shaping the experiences for them.
Thank you for sharing. Our next question is from the scene, and the question is, in India, UX is growing a lot and many people are getting into the field. Sometimes they feel overwhelmed by the competition, and our viewers wondering whether making that career path in UX will be worth it or not. Would love to hear from all of you in relation to this question. Racine, let's start with you.
Sure. I wouldn't see competition as a bad thing. I'll also say that there's a lot of problems in the world, and UX, we need more UXers to help solve it. So I think competition is good. It'll make everyone better. And two, there's enough work for everyone to participate and be involved and make the world a better place. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can maybe pick up from there. I mean, I agree. I mean, I think there's an aspect of competition that can certainly be good, just in terms of it pushing our collective skill sets forward. But certainly in my time at Google, what I have seen is that, every problem that a single person was working on over time became something that dozens, if not more, people were working on. And so it's definitely not a zero-sum game. I think that there are so many problems in front of us to solve that it's really kind of, we need more people, just period. And I think the second thing that I would say related to that is one of the things that I get the most joy and satisfaction from in UX, right, is the nature of how we work. And I think that there's been a thread of this throughout our conversation today, right? But collaboration is one of the strongest kind of pieces of our culture, as a UX organization, at least at Google, and I think certainly more broadly. And so you'll find that over time, I mean, having kind of the diversity of skill sets and intelligences and those folks working together on common problems is really a force multiplier, right, to what any one person could do individually. And so I would focus a lot more on the kind of collaborative collective, more so than kind of the individual competition, and really just keep it focused to like, what are the problems that need to be solved and how can we get the most out of everybody?
Great. Thank you for sharing. And definitely agree and echo the sentiments here. So the next question we have is, I know design thinking, but don't feel that I necessarily have the technical skills to apply for and land a UX role. Can you please suggest a few ways to pick up those skills? Anyone can jump in here.
Happy to take a shot at it. I mean, I think it's a good point, and I think there's a certain sort of baseline requirement for any of the disciplines that we've talked about. That does require kind of more of a technical skill set, but it's almost hard to say exactly where to start. I mean, because the difference in kind of technical skill sets between a researcher, a program manager, a conversational designer, et cetera, right, are quite different. And so, I think what I would say is, try to first, kind of find that intuition about where you think you want to focus, and then kind of look a little bit deeper at what are some of the introductory courses, books, conferences and things like that you can attend to start developing from there. I would also just say, no matter what that field is, expose yourself to a lot more work. I think that all of us have struggled at times with our own sense of confidence on our own technical abilities. And there's a period of time where I think that what you want to achieve is sometimes farther away than where your capabilities are, but that shouldn't get in the way of you trying and progressing either way, right? And I think the second part on this for me is that while we've talked a lot about technical skill sets and the quality of your work being critical, so much of the work that we do in UX is more on the soft skills side, right? Our ability to really empathize with not just our users, but the people that we work with. Our ability to kind of help, influence and activate people around us. And so I wouldn't look as technical skills purely as an Achilles heel, right? Because there are so many other aspects to the UX work that are broader than just the technical skill set.
Yeah, to add to that, I'm an interaction designer. If that's something that you're also trying to pursue, some like technical skills that you could kind of like look into is like Sketch and Figma. These are design tools that I use on a day-to-day basis in my day-to-day. So I would understand those tools, how they work, how do I draw UI with these tools. I would look up, prototyping tools to use. Principal, Protopie are some, just to name a few, but there are dozens of others. They're all kind of the same in terms of like how to use them. The nuances about them are just kind of like the differences between like a pencil and a paintbrush, right? Like you can draw an image with both. It just depends on like what you're trying to do. It kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? Like I would practice. And sometimes it's like mimicking an existing UI just so you can understand how to use these tools is probably a good way to start. Yeah, that's just what I would add.
Great. Great advice. And a related question to building skills here is how should I best emphasize transferable skills when switching careers, for example, from customer service to UX? And Kai, why don't you start us off with this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. And I think, of course, it's also going to depend on what field you're coming from. But I think here what I would emphasize probably more is, like I think the example was customer service, right? I think that's a great example of someone who's been in a very user-forward role, right? And so, kind of demonstrating your ability to think on users' behalf, right? Empathize with what they're going through. Your ability to take, a collection of problems that you're seeing from a customer service perspective, right? And sort of abstract them into a larger problem that a company or an organization can solve. That would be a great kind of example of how you can take something that you've been doing in one field and apply it to another. I think obviously the technical skill side of things may not be as transferable, but again, like the soft skill side of what we do is just as important, if not more, as you grow in your career. And I would argue that in most professions, that's also true. So really focus on those skills that you can transfer in as well.
Great. Thanks for sharing. So our next question is from a self-proclaimed total beginner. So the question is, with the platforms of phone, tablet, and computer being the platforms that we're meant to be designing for, how much creativity and uniqueness can we honestly achieve with UX? And Bobby, why don't you share your thoughts on this one?
Sure. Yeah. I think there's a lot to say about this question. I think one is that I think that these platforms of phone, tablet, and computer may be primary, but that's certainly not like certainly the emergent trend of surfaces is ever expanding to things like phone and TV and your automobile and your glasses. I mean, there's so many different surfaces that are proliferating. Like right now, I think we account for about 14 primary surfaces when thinking about a lot of our assistant development, for example, at Google. So, and then as far as creativity and uniqueness, there's a couple of things I'll say here. First is that there's creativity as it applies to the unbounded, and there's creativity that applies to bounded. I think the unbounded is typically kind of more what we think about as art, and like the bounded is more what we think about design and user experience. Meaning, as I mentioned in the video, Charles Eames has talked a lot about design being about constraints. And that was definitely something I learned about early in my career, because I was more of an unbounded type in that I was doing a lot of really expressive type of design that was that wasn't as much kind of subject to constraints ahead of coming to Amazon. And at the outset, I couldn't even really quite grasp why I would want to work at a company like Amazon, because I couldn't perceive what the design problem was and what that opportunity would be for like, creativity and uniqueness. And what I realized in talking to one of the senior designers there at the time was that the creativity of solving, for the constraints, and figuring out how to create mainstream experiences that aren't lowest common denominator is one of the kind of most biggest creative problems to solve for altogether. And I found that to be true subsequently and ever since in my career. It's like the headroom for creativity and solving within those constraints and the ever kind of expanding evolving nature of human psychology and UX patterns and societal problems. It's like the headroom for creativity is infinite. And so and UX design, I really believe, plays such a huge role in like helping light the path for kind of inspiration and opportunity there. And that's where I get a lot of like, my desire fill a lot of my desire for creativity and bringing my own unique point of view to solving those problems.
I think maybe one thing I would just add to that is, it's a great question because it really hits at a kind of polarity that I think that we all struggle with, certainly at Google, right? Where what are the moments when you really need to be leaning into the unique characteristics of a platform versus what are the times that you need to really be thinking about the extensibility of the design that you're creating across multiple platforms. We design our experiences to really help with user journeys. And one of the things that we see is that our user journeys oftentimes cut across multiple platforms, so mobile, desktop, tablet, et cetera. And it's important, from like a brand perspective, right, that when people are using any of those devices, there is still, a sort of brand cohesion, right, that it feels like this is a Google product. And so I'd argue that there's a creativity in that problem in and of itself, right? How do you scale those brand attributes across platforms while at the same time having very intentional design that allows you to get the most out of any individual platform?
Thanks for sharing. The next question is looking into the future. So the question is, what are your thoughts of UX design and what it might look like in the future? And can we hope to see more UX jobs emerging in the future as well?
Yeah, I can start. I think the short answer is yes. I can see a world where like everything is UX, right? Like, I feel like now everyone's bar in terms of like expectations of like what good experiences look like continues to rise. And I think that's phenomenal because it just means that like they aren't accepting poor experiences from companies any longer. And so the level of good experiences gets better, which makes the world easier and more comprehensive for people. And complicated things like finance and insurance become super simple. And so I can see a world where like, everyone's thinking about UX. Yeah. Oh, Bobby or Kai, if you guys want to chime in.
I mean, I'd probably just echo that. I think the simple answer here is yes. If you think about how quickly technology is advancing, I don't even think we know what kind of experiences we'll be designing 10 years from now. Some of the things that I've been thinking a lot about recently, right, is that we're seeing more and more use cases for sort of multimodal design, where users are sort of seamlessly moving between voice and touch and visual, and we don't even really have the tools yet to really design those experiences in a way that you can kind of pre-visualize. Same thing I would say is true for like ambient computing, right, where more and more of the devices around us are becoming intelligent. Like there's so many things that we're just getting into, right? And I think we mentioned this earlier in the panel, but like, the tool sets and things like that are going to be changing so rapidly that we don't really know what the next, kind of 5 to 10 years looks like. But I think that is all really just a way of saying that without question, there's just going to be more opportunity, more specializations, right? And really that just means that there's more demand for more UXers.
Absolutely. I would just like point to the growth trajectory at Google, even in the time that I've been there, where the UX team has gone from really being more in the hundreds, to now like, well over like 4,500 for Google, like across all of Google. So that just kind of showcases the incredible trajectory and growth of UX and the growing need, and I think a need that doesn't appear to be slowing down anytime soon. So.
Yeah, so it's definitely inspirational to think about what the future of UX can become. So with that, I want to thank the three of our panelists today, Racine, Kai, and Bobby. Really appreciate all of your insight into the field and sharing your own personal journeys. And also thank you to everyone who chimed in with their questions and who participated and viewed today. We hope you're able to take away insight into various UX careers, opportunities, and paths to get your start in UX. For more ways to begin your career and learn more in-demand skills in UX design, check out the Google UX Design Certificate, and I believe the link should be below. And thanks again for joining us and for this panel discussion.